Colin slapped his last silver down. Unknot her, or I shoot. The rope bit into the girl's wrists as she stood on a stool like livestock, chin lifted only because refusing to bow was the last thing nobody could take. Her brother Rafe Ashford, boots polished with other people's paint, laughed like this was a game of cards. Colin felt the whole saloon watching to see if he'd blink. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Rafe's laughter died into a sneer when Colin's pistol came fully into view. Old iron, oiled and honest, the kind that didn't stutter. Put that away, the auctioneer said, trying to smile around fear. Macklin Doyle wore a vest too fine for a town like Bristle Ridge, which meant he made his money off men who were drunk enough to forget what decency cost. Colin didn't look at Macklin. He looked at the girl. Her dress was plain calico, torn at the hem, and the bruises at her forearms were new enough to still hold the shape of fingers. But her eyes, dark, steady, furious, weren't pleading. They were counting exits, counting threats, counting who, in this room, might be bought and who might be broken. Colin knew that kind of counting. He'd done it on battlefields and in barns, with a man bleeding out and no doctor for 20 miles. Rafe lifted both hands in a show of innocence. Now hold on. We got bids to take. Ain't that right, gents? A handful of men chuckled, the laugh of men who'd never had their own skin at stake. Colin's jaw tightened until the scar along it pulled, an old reminder that life didn't ask permission to mark you. You already took bids, Colin said. His voice came out low, the way it did when he was trying not to do something he couldn't take back. From men who think they can buy a body and call it a bargain. Macklin cleared his throat. She's being sold to settle a debt. Legal as a lien. That's not law, Colin said. That's rot wearing a badge. Rafe's eyes flashed. She's mine to sell. Blood is blood. The girl's shoulders didn't move, but Colin saw the small tremor in her hands where the rope rubbed raw. She didn't look at her brother. She stared straight past him, as if refusing him even the satisfaction of being acknowledged. Colin shoved the pouch of coins forward across the table. Macklin's fingers twitched. Rafe's mouth parted, hungry. Count it, Colin said. Then cut her loose. Rafe's laugh came back sharp. You don't even know her name. I don't have to, Colin answered. I know what you are. A quiet rolled through the room. Some men shifted like their boots suddenly didn't fit right. Macklin reached for the pouch. Colin cocked the hammer. Macklin froze. Colin leaned in, close enough for Macklin to smell the dust and horse on him, close enough to let the promise settle. You touch that money before she's free, I'll put your hand on the floor beside it. Macklin swallowed. He nodded once, quick. Rafe spat on the sawdust. You gonna take her home, cowboy? You gonna play hero and keep her under your roof? The girl finally turned her head, just a little, and her eyes caught Colin's for the first time. There was no gratitude there, only a question. What are you buying? The question landed in Colin's chest like a stone. I ain't buying her, Colin said, careful with every word. I'm buying her off you. Rafe's smile went thin. Same thing. No, Colin said. Not if she's got a choice when she steps down. The stool creaked under the girl. Rope creaked too, like it wanted to hold on. Macklin lifted his hands, palms out. Now there's no need for knife, Colin said. A boy by the bar barely old enough to shave, old enough to see what men were tossed a small blade toward Rafe. Rafe caught it with a grin like he'd won. He stepped toward his sister. She didn't flinch. Rafe leaned in as if to whisper, then dragged the blade down the rope, sawing slow, enjoying the way the fibers resisted. Colin's fingers flexed around his pistol until his knuckles ached. When the last strand snapped, the girl's hands fell free. For one breath, she stayed on the stool, wrists lifted like she didn't trust gravity. Then she stepped down. Not toward Rafe, not toward Cullen. Toward the open space between them, where a person could choose to be neither owned nor protected. Cullen lowered his pistol an inch. "Name?" he asked, softer. The girl rubbed her wrists. The skin was torn. Blood beaded bright. "Inez," she said. The sound of it hit Cullen in a place he didn't like to admit existed. Inez. It wasn't a name that belonged on an auction block. Rafe snorted. "Inez Ashford, my sister. And she's got debts same as me." Inez's mouth tightened. "Your debts." Rafe's eyes narrowed. "Don't start." Cullen pushed the coins toward Macklin without looking away from Rafe. "Count it. Then you're done." Macklin grabbed the pouch like it might vanish and hurried into counting silver clinking, the sound too clean for this room. Rafe's gaze stayed on Cullen. "You got a ranch, don't you? Strickland place up by Redwater?" Cullen didn't answer. Rafe's grin returned, meaner. "Heard you're a man alone. Heard you got no kin left. Maybe you're buying yourself a wife." The word wife snapped through the room like a whip. Inez's head turned sharply, not toward Cullen, toward the door. Cullen saw it then. The trap. If she fled, they'd chase her. Not for honor. For sport. If she stayed near him, they'd call her his property, and the blame would stick to her skin. Cullen took a step, placing his body between her and the men who'd been bidding. "You don't get to name what she is," Cullen said. Rafe's jaw clenched. "She ain't pure, if that's what you're hoping. Ain't worth the money." A ripple of cruel laughter. Inez's face didn't change, but Cullen felt the air change like a wound had been reopened in silence. Cullen's voice stayed steady, though his gut twisted. "Worth ain't measured by what a man can take." Macklin finished counting and nodded, quick. "It's all here. Transaction's done." Rafe held out his hand. Cullen didn't move. Rafe's fingers curled. "Money." Cullen slid the pouch to Macklin. "He'll pay your debt to whoever claims it." Rafe's eyes went bright with anger. "You think you can humiliate me in my own town?" "I think you can't be trusted with coin," Cullen said. "Or with kin." Rafe made a sound like a growl. His hand drifted toward his belt. The room went taut. Inez shifted behind Cullen, not hiding positioning. Cullen didn't want a gunfight. Not here. Not with her in the crossfire. He angled his head toward Inez, without taking his eyes off Rafe. "If you want to walk out that door alone, you can." Her breath hitched. "And then what?" Cullen understood the question beneath her words. Asterisk, where would I go that you can reach me? Asterisk, he swallowed. Then I'll keep walking until my legs give out, and I'll still be between you and them. For the first time, something in Inez's expression cracked just a hairline. Not trust, not hope, recognition. Like she recognized a man who knew what it cost to stand alone. Rafe's hand slipped from his belt, slow. He spat again. "Take her. But don't come crying when she ruins you." Cullen's eyes narrowed. "You already ruined her." Rafe's smile was ugly. "She let it happen." Cullen moved before he could think. His fist connected with Rafe's mouth, one clean strike, knuckles meeting teeth. Rafe stumbled back into the table, coins rattling, men swearing and scrambling. Inez sucked in a breath. Cullen grabbed Rafe by the collar and hauled him close. "You ever say that again," he said, quiet enough only Rafe could hear, "and I'll forget the difference between a man and a snake." Rafe's eyes watered from the hit, but his grin returned through blood. "You're already forgetting. You just bought yourself trouble?" Cullen shoved him away. The room buzzed with excitement, now blood and spectacle, the favorite currency of small towns. Cullen holstered his pistol and turned to Inez. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't an order. It was an offering made out of whatever scraps of decency the world had left him. Inez stared at the door again. Then she looked at her wrists. Then she looked at Cullen. "What are you?" she asked. He exhaled. "A man who can't stand seeing you tied up." Inez's mouth quirked barely. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can promise is true, Colin said. She glanced toward the men, toward her brother, wiping blood from his lip and laughing at something whispered in his ear. Her shoulders lifted as if she were putting on armor. All right, she said, but I walk beside you, not behind. Colin nodded once. Beside. He started toward the door. Inez followed. The men watched them leave, like they were watching a horse walk off with their money. Outside, Colin didn't pause to admire the street or the storefronts. He kept moving, boots steady, keeping his pace matched to hers. Inez's steps faltered once, like pain had caught her low in the belly. Colin noticed. He didn't ask, not yet, because he knew the way pain and pride traveled together. A voice called from behind them. Strickland. Colin stopped. Sheriff Talmadge Tanner stood in front of the jailhouse, arms folded, hat tipped low. Tanner was a lawman by necessity, not by love. He'd been born to a poor family and learned early that order kept the hungrier wolves from chewing the town clean. His gaze slid to Inez, then back to Colin. You startin' a war in my street? Tanner asked. Colin's jaw tightened. I ended one. Tanner's eyes narrowed. You bought her? Colin didn't like the word. It tasted like the sawdust inside that saloon. I paid to untie her. Tanner studied Inez. You going with him? Inez's voice didn't shake. I'm going where I choose. Tanner held her gaze a moment, then looked at Colin. If you hurt her, I'll bury you. Colin nodded. Fair. Tanner's mouth twitched like he wanted to say more, but chose not to. Rafe's a rat, but rats bite when cornered. I'm not cornering him, Colin said. I'm leaving. Tanner's eyes hardened. Leaving don't always keep trouble from following. Colin's gaze flicked to Inez's bruised wrists again. I know. Tanner stepped aside. Colin walked toward the livery. The stable boy recognized him and hurried to bring his gelding, a solid bay with a white sock, steady as a prayer. Colin took the reins and glanced at Inez. You ride? Inez lifted her chin. I can. He didn't miss the careful phrasing. He found a second horse for her smaller, gentler. He helped her up only when she nodded permission, his hands light, respectful. Her body tensed at the contact anyway. Colin hated that. Hated the way the world trained women to expect pain. They rode out without looking back. Colin kept his pace slow, letting the town fall away behind them. After a mile, when the sound of Bristle Ridge turned to silence, Inez spoke. Why? Colin didn't pretend not to understand. Because you were tied up. That's still not enough, she said. He swallowed. His throat felt tight with words he hadn't used in years. I've seen men do evil and call it ordinary. I couldn't, he stopped, jaw clenching. I couldn't be the kind of man who watched. Inez's gaze stayed forward. And what kind of man are you now? Colin's mouth turned bitter. One who just made himself your shadow. I don't need a shadow, she said. I know, Colin answered. But you might need time. And I can give you that. Inez's fingers tightened around her reins. Time for what? For you to decide what you want, Colin said. She let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but wasn't. A man paid silver for my freedom, and now he's offering me choices like I'm a guest. Colin's eyes stayed on the trail. You're not my guest. What am I? Colin's throat worked. A person. Inez's gaze slid toward him, sharp. That's a dangerous thing to say in this territory. Then it's a dangerous territory, Colin said. They rode in silence for a while. Colin kept listening, not just for hoofbeats behind them, but for the way Inez breathed. Every few minutes, she shifted in the saddle as if something inside her pulled. Pain? Nerves? Hunger? Colin had lived around cattle long enough to recognize the way bodies carried secrets. He didn't force questions. He waited. By the time the sun sat high enough to bake the back of his neck, they reached the fork where his land began. Redwater Ranch wasn't a grand spread like the ones east of the river. It was honest acres, hard won, stitched together by fencing and stubbornness. The gate had a latch that always caught wrong. Colin dismounted, fixed it with one swift lift, and held the gate open. Inez rode through first. He noticed she didn't relax at the sight of open land. Freedom could be as frightening as captivity when you didn't know where it ended. They rode another mile. The ranch house came into view, a plain wood frame, paint faded, porch boards worn by boots that no longer had company. Inez's gaze swept the place fast. No curtains fluttering, no smoke from a chimney, no laughter. It looked like a place built for work, not comfort. Colin felt a familiar ache in his chest. He'd built it that way on purpose. Just you? Inez asked. Colin nodded. Just me. Her eyes narrowed. Then why bring me here? Colin swallowed. Because it's safer than Bristle Ridge. Is it? She asked. Colin didn't lie. It's quieter. Trouble takes longer to arrive. Inez dismounted without help, boots hitting dirt solid. She looked at the house like she was measuring whether it would swallow her. Colin led the horses to the corral. When he turned back, Inez was still standing in the yard, arms at her sides, breathing shallow. You hungry? He asked. Her mouth tightened. Yes. Colin nodded. You can eat, wash up, and rest. Then you tell me where you want to go next. Inez's eyes flashed. You expect me to believe you'll just let me leave? Colin didn't move closer. I can't keep you. If I tried, I'd be the same as them. Her jaw worked, suspicion battling something deeper. Then why pay? She asked. Colin's gaze dropped to her wrists. Because leaving should be your decision, not your punishment. Inez stared at him a long time. Then her shoulders sagged a fraction, like she'd been holding herself upright on anger alone. All right, she said quietly. Food first. Colin let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Inside the house, he moved like a man who'd lived alone too long, everything in its place, every movement efficient. He set bread and beans on the table. Inez sat, not at the head, not at the end middle, where she could see the door and the windows. She ate fast, but not messy, like hunger was a private shame. Colin ate slower, watching her without staring. After a few bites, Inez's hand froze over her spoon. Her face went pale. Colin's gut tightened. You all right? Inez swallowed hard. Fine. But her throat worked like she was fighting something. Then she stood abruptly, chair scraping. Colin rose too, but he didn't touch her. Inez rushed to the back and retched into the wash basin. Colin stood in the doorway, fists clenched at his sides. He'd seen sickness. He'd seen wounds. He'd seen men die. But the sound coming from Inez wasn't death. It was something else. Something he'd only heard once, years ago, when his mother had been sick in the mornings, and his father had smiled like the world had given him a gift. Colin's chest went tight. Inez wiped her mouth, trembling. When she turned, her eyes met his. He saw fear there now, not fear of him. Fear of what her body had just confessed. Colin's voice came out rough. How long? Inez stiffened. Don't. Inez, Colin said, and the way he said her name surprised him soft, like it mattered. How long? Her hands clenched on the edge of the basin. Long enough. Colin's mind raced, trying to fit pieces together Rafe's cruel comment. The way she shifted in the saddle, the pale set of her face. His throat went dry. Is it why he sold you? Colin asked. Inez's eyes flashed with rage and shame braided together. He sold me because he could. Colin took a careful step back, giving her space. Who's the father? Inez's breath hitched. Her gaze dropped to the floorboards. Then she lifted her head, and something in her expression hardened into truth. You, she said. The word hit Colin like a gunshot. His stomach dropped. His mind tried to reject it, tried to insist it was impossible, that he wasn't the kind of man who left a woman carrying anything but bitterness. But memory came unbidden. A boarding house in a dust town. A night he'd sworn meant nothing, because meaning was dangerous. A woman with dark eyes who... Dee looked at him like she could see every crack in him, and still didn't flinch. Colin's hand gripped the doorframe so hard the wood creaked. "Inez," he whispered. She didn't soften. "I didn't know your name then. Just your scar in your hands, and the way you looked like you were running from your own soul." Colin's chest burned. "Why didn't you? Tell you?" She cut in. "So you could do what? Marry me out of duty? Hand me coin and call it clean?" Colin's mouth opened, but no answer came. Inez's eyes shone, but she refused to let tears fall. "I was trying to survive. Then he found out. And he decided I was worth more tied up than standing." Colin stared at her, the room tilting. A child. His. A future he'd stopped believing in. A line he thought ended with him. Salvation. And suddenly, the weight of it, the responsibility, the threat, the way Rafe would come back hungry for whatever this meant pressed down on Colin's shoulders like a yoke. He forced air into his lungs. Outside, a horse whinnied. Then another. Hoofbeats. Close. Colin's head snapped toward the window. Inez's eyes widened. Colin moved fast, crossing the room to the rifle above the hearth. He cocked it, heart slamming. If Rafe had followed, if Bristle Ridge had decided the transaction wasn't done. Colin turned back to Inez, voice tight with urgency. "Get behind me." Inez lifted her chin, stubborn even now. "I walk beside you." Colin's gaze locked on her, fear and wonder twisting together. "You're carrying my child," he said, the words tasting like a vow. Outside, the porch boards creaked under a stranger's step, and a voice called through the thin wood of the door, too familiar, too pleased. "Strickland," Rafe drawled. "Open up. We need to talk about what you just bought. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe." Now, back to the story. Bought. Colin didn't open the door. He stood with the rifle braced across his chest, listening to the porch boards complain under unfamiliar weight, listening to the way a man tried to sound friendly when he'd come to take. "Strickland," Rafe called again, voice slick as spilled liquor. "Open up. We need to talk." Inside, the house felt too small for the fear trying to fill it. Inez stood a few paces behind Colin, not hiding, not cowering, just steady, like she'd decided the world could throw whatever it wanted, and she would keep her spine. Colin kept his voice low. "Stay back." "Beside," she whispered, stubborn enough to make his chest ache. He didn't argue. He only shifted his stance, so his body was still the first thing any bullet would meet. Outside, a second voice drifted in, nervous and polished. "Now, Colin, there's no cause for Macklin Doyle, of course." The auctioneer always came back to the scene like a buzzard checking if anything was left. And then there was a third sound silence shaped like a man. Colin knew the type, the kind who didn't waste breath, because breath wasn't what made people obey. He moved to the narrow side window and stole a look. Rafe stood closest to the door, split lip turned into a grin. Macklin hovered half a step behind him, vest too fine for honest work. And off to the side, leaning on a porch post like he owned the air, was a thin man with a hawk's face and dead-still eyes. He watched the house the way a butcher watched a calf. Colin's throat went dry. Inez saw it on his face. "Who is he?" she asked, quiet. Colin didn't want to answer. Saying a threat out loud made it real, but the threat was already there, breathing on his porch. "Trouble," he said. "The kind that doesn't leave when you ask." Rafe's voice rose, cheerful and mean. "Inez, come on out. Let's not make this ugly." Inez's shoulders tightened. Colin could feel the heat of her anger behind him, and beneath it the tight, careful fear she tried to bury. Colin's fingers flexed around the rifle. He could end this with one pull. He could also start a war that would reach her no matter where she ran. He pictured the town's eyes, the whispers, the men who'd bid like they were buying a horse. He pictured Rafe bleeding out on his porch, and Macklin running to the sheriff with his hands up, crying innocence. He pictured Inez in the middle of it. No. Colin unlatched the door and pulled it open, stepping out first so the frame covered Inez. Rafe's grin widened instantly. There he is. Colin kept the rifle low, not pointed, but ready. You're trespassing, Rafe laughed. On your porch? That's a fancy word for a man who lives alone. Macklin tried to smile. Colin, son, we're just here to discuss the misunderstanding. Colin's eyes slid to the hawk-faced man. And he? Rafe slapped the man's shoulder like they were friends. This here is Lyle Hart. He's persistent. Lyle didn't smile. I'm paid to be. Rafe's grin sharpened. See? Honest. Colin's jaw clenched. Say what you came to say. Rafe's gaze flicked past Colin, trying to find Inez in the shadows of the doorway. I came to retrieve my sister. Inez stepped into view beside Colin, chin lifted. You sold your sister. Rafe's smile didn't reach his eyes. I did what I had to. You did what you wanted, she said, voice like flint. Macklin cleared his throat. Now, Inez, there's no need to rile things up. You're safe. That's good. But Rafe's got obligations. You understand how debt works. Inez's mouth tightened. Funny, you didn't explain debt when you were taking bids. Macklin's cheeks flushed. That was business. Colin's voice went cold. People aren't business. Lyle's gaze lingered on Inez's wrists, on the torn skin, like he was assessing damage on an item. She's the collateral, he said, flat. Collateral comes due. Colin felt something primal rear up in him. His trigger finger twitched. He forced it still. Collateral isn't a person. It's a lie men tell so they can sleep after doing evil. Lyle's eyes didn't blink. Sleep is for men who don't owe. Rafe leaned forward, grin returning. Here's what's happening, Strickland. I owe Lyle here. I promised him my sister. Inez didn't move, but Colin felt her breath hitch. He saw her hand drift toward her belly, protective without thinking. Rafe's eyes followed, hungry. And now, I see why you've been acting so proud. Colin's blood went ice. Macklin's smile tightened. Rafe, now. Rafe ignored him. You carrying Inez? Inez's jaw clenched, but she didn't deny it. Denying would be useless. The truth was already written in the way she'd moved, the way she'd gone pale, the way she'd fought nausea like it was another enemy. Rafe's grin turned vicious. Well, ain't that something? A baby's worth more than a girl. Ain't that right, Hart? Lyle's gaze sharpened, a flicker of interest. Depends on whose. Rafe's eyes slid to Colin. Whose do you think? Our lonely rancher here goes and plants his seed and doesn't even know. Colin's chest tightened like a fist had closed around his ribs. The word seed shouldn't sound like a crime. Rafe made it one. Inez's voice cut in, low and deadly. Don't you speak about my child. Rafe's eyes brightened. My niece or nephew, you mean? Colin stepped forward half a pace, rifle lifting a fraction. You came for money, Rafe laughed. Smart boy. Yes, I came for money. You pay what I owe Hart, and I walk away. No one in town has to know you got my sister pregnant. No one has to know she was on that stool because of you. Inez's head snapped toward Colin, fury flashing. Because of him? Rafe spread his hands. If he'd kept his hands to himself, you'd still be just a mouth to feed. Not an investment. Colin's vision narrowed. He forced himself to breathe. One wrong word could cut Inez deeper than any fist. Inez, Colin said, voice rough but steady. I didn't put you on that stool. He did. Inez's eyes didn't soften, but they didn't break either. Then don't bargain with him, she said. Rafe leaned in, voice sweet as poison. You don't get to decide. Your body isn't just yours anymore. It's carrying value. Cullen's rage hit white hot. He raised the rifle so the barrel pointed at Rafe's boots, close enough to make the message clear. Leave. Macklin's hands flew up. Now, Cullen, leave. Cullen repeated, louder. Rafe's grin faltered, then hardened. You think you can scare me? You're one man. Cullen's eyes slid to Lyle. He's one man too. Lyle's mouth twitched. I'm enough. Rafe laughed again, but his eyes were sharp now, calculating. Fine. You want to play hard? I'll play hard. Hart don't want money, Strickland. Not anymore. Cullen's stomach dropped. Rafe tilted his head toward Inez. He wants her. Inez's breath caught. Cullen felt her tremble, just once, and it cut him deeper than any threat. Cullen's voice went low. She's not going anywhere. Rafe shrugged. Then I go to town and tell him you stole my sister. Tell him you put a bastard in her and hid her like a thief hides stolen goods. You know Bristle Ridge, Cullen. You know what men do when they smell sin. Macklin nodded, eager. He's right. Folks don't like scandals. Cullen stared at Macklin. Folks don't like being shown what they are. Macklin swallowed. Rafe leaned closer, enjoying himself. So here's my offer. $200 by sundown. Or I walk into town with my bruised mouth and my story, and I make you the villain they're all happy to hang. 200. A fortune. A noose. Inez's voice was tight. You'd burn a town just to save your own skin. Rafe smiled. I'd burn you to keep mine warm. Cullen's fingers tightened around the rifle until his knuckles ached. He could shoot. He could end Rafe's mouth forever. But Crow would still exist. Hart would still exist. Men like Macklin would still exist. The rot was bigger than one brother. Cullen's eyes stayed on Rafe. You're done here. Rafe's grin widened. No, cowboy. I'm just getting started. A new sound cut through the standoff hoofbeats, fast and determined. Sheriff Talmadge Tanner rode into the yard like he'd chased trouble his whole life and was tired of it. He reined in hard, dust rising around his horse's legs. His gaze flicked over the scene rifle in Cullen's hands, Inez's pale face, Rafe's grin, Macklin's slick smile, Lyle's dead eyes. Tanner's hand rested on his revolver. Step off the porch, he said to Rafe. All of you. Rafe put on innocence. Sheriff. Just family matters. Tanner's eyes narrowed. Family don't come with hired guns. Lyle's gaze went to Tanner's badge, unimpressed. Your badge doesn't stop deaths. Tanner's smile was thin. My badge stops corpses from piling up. You want to test it? Macklin chuckled nervously. Now, Sheriff, you're overreacting. Shut, Tanner snapped, and Macklin's mouth closed like a trap. Tanner looked at Inez. You safe? Inez lifted her chin. Safer than I was. Tanner's gaze went to Cullen. Strickland. Cullen's jaw tightened. They're not leaving. Tanner nodded once, as if he'd expected that. Rafe, you got no business here. Rafe's grin sharpened. I got business wherever my sister is. Inez's voice cut in. She's not your business anymore. Rafe's eyes flashed. You think you can erase blood? Inez's gaze didn't waver. I think you can't use it as a chain. Tanner's voice was hard. Rafe, last warning. Rafe lifted his hands, slow. All right, I'll go. But you can't stop a debt, Sheriff. You can't stop Crow. The name hit the air like smoke. Cullen felt Tanner's posture tighten. Tanner had heard that name before. Everyone had, even if they pretended they hadn't. Tanner's eyes narrowed. Crow? Rafe's grin returned, triumphant. Yup, that Crow. And he wants what he's owed. Lyle's mouth twitched. I work for him. Tanner exhaled slow. Then you're all leaving now. And you're leaving alive only because I'm standing here. Rafe stepped back off the porch, eyes never leaving Inez. Sundown, he reminded, voice sweet. 200, or I tell the town your secret. And Hart tells Crow. He winked. Maybe Crow visits? He turned, and Macklin scurried after him like a rat behind a bigger rat. Lyle lingered a moment, gaze on Inez's belly. She's value? He said softly. Cullen's voice was ice. She's human. Lyle's eyes flicked to Cullen. Humans are the most valuable things. Then he stepped off the porch and followed. When they were gone, the yard felt wrong, too quiet, too open. Tanner dismounted and walked up onto the porch, jaw tight. He looked at Inez, then at Cullen. Inside, he ordered. Cullen didn't like orders. But he nodded and guided Inez back into the house, leaving the door open so Tanner could follow. Inez sat at the table with the stiffness of a woman who refused to be seen as fragile. Cullen stood near the window, watching the yard, watching the trail. Tanner set his hat on the table like he meant business. "Tell me everything," he said. Inez's gaze met Cullen's for a heartbeat. Cullen nodded, giving her the choice. She chose truth. She spoke of rope, of bids, of Macklin's smile, of Rafe's laughter, of Cullen's pistol. She spoke of the way men looked away. She didn't paint herself as pure. She painted herself as real. Cullen listened, fists clenched, feeling every word like a nail. When Inez mentioned the baby, Tanner's gaze sharpened, then softened in a way that surprised Cullen. "How far along?" Tanner asked. Inez's hand went to her belly. "I don't know." Tanner nodded. "We need Odelia Price." Cullen's jaw tightened. "Midwife?" Tanner nodded. "She'll confirm. She'll write it down. And she'll keep you both alive if stress decides to make a claim." Inez bristled. "I'm not delicate." Tanner's voice was firm. "Pregnant ain't delicate. Pregnant is dangerous when men are hunting you." Cullen swallowed. "We can't go to town. Rafe'll be waiting." Tanner's eyes narrowed. "Then we go now. Before he gathers more mouths. Before rumor grows legs." Inez stood. "We go." Cullen's chest tightened. The instinct to keep her hidden flared hard, but hiding wasn't safety. Hiding was what men like Crow depended on. Cullen nodded. "All right." They rode back into Bristle Ridge with Tanner leading, Cullen beside Inez as if his body could block stairs. The town saw them anyway. Heads turned, mouths whispered. A few men grinned like they still tasted auction dust. Inez didn't shrink. She rode with her chin lifted, eyes forward, refusing to feed their hunger. Odelia Price's door opened before they knocked, like she'd felt trouble coming in her bones. She took one look at Inez's wrists and went sharp. Inside, she took one look at Cullen and went sharper. "You sit. Quiet." Cullen sat because he didn't trust himself to stand. Odelia checked Inez with hands that were firm and respectful. She asked questions without shame. She touched Inez's belly with a listening palm and hummed like she could hear a heartbeat through skin. When she finally nodded, Cullen's lungs unlocked. "You're with child," Odelia said. Inez exhaled, eyes closing for one beat. Odelia's gaze swung to Cullen. "And you," she said. "If you're the father, decide what kind of man you are." Cullen swallowed. "I already did," Odelia snorted. "Men always say that right before they fail." Cullen's jaw clenched. "Then watch me not fail." Odelia studied him, unimpressed by words. "We'll see." Tanner pulled out paper and pencil. "We're writing statements," he said. "Everything. Names, threats, heart, Crow." Odelia's mouth tightened at Crow's name. "That man is a sickness," she muttered. "And sickness spreads where people are quiet." Inez signed her name with a hand that trembled only slightly. Cullen signed too, swearing he'd paid to free her, swearing he'd seen rope, swearing he'd heard threats. Paper felt thin against evil, but it felt like something. When they stepped back into the street, Tanner's jaw was set. "Rafe's sleeping behind Macklin's saloon," he said quietly. "You were right." Inez's eyes narrowed. "His boot trunk is there." Cullen's gut tightened. "What's in it?" Inez swallowed. Lists, names, money. I didn't understand it at first. I thought it was just as gambling. But there were women's names. Some crossed out. Cullen's stomach turned. Tanner's eyes hardened. That's evidence. Cullen's voice was low. Then we take it. Tanner shook his head. Not like thieves. I need cause for a search. Cullen's jaw tightened. By the time you get cause, it'll be gone. Odelia's voice cut in from the doorway. Then let the men watch the men, and let the woman do what men don't see. Cullen's head snapped toward her. Odelia pointed her chin at Inez. They don't watch her. They think she's already broken. Use that. Inez's spine straightened. I can get in. Cullen's voice came out harsh. No. Inez's gaze flashed. Don't. Cullen swallowed hard, forcing himself to remember his promise choices, not cages. Tell me your plan, he said. Inez explained, calm and precise. She would walk into the saloon in daylight. She would demand time. She would smile when needed. She would get to the back room and take the papers. She would walk out. Cullen hated every word, because every word risked her. Tanner exhaled. I'll have my deputy across the street, he said. No uniform. Eyes open. Cullen nodded. And I'll be close. Inez's eyes narrowed. Close, not controlling. Cullen's jaw clenched. Close. They moved when the sun was high and Macklin was busiest. The saloon smelled like old sins and fresh lies. Men laughed too loud. A piano hammered a tune that tried to pretend this was all harmless fun. Macklin's smile widened when he saw Inez. Back so soon? Inez's voice was calm. I came to talk to my brother. Rafe stepped out of the back room with that same grin, like bruises were just decorations. Look at you, he drawled. All proper now. Inez stepped closer, chin lifted. I'm not going with heart. Rafe's eyes narrowed. You don't get to refuse. Inez's gaze stayed steady. I do. Because if you make a scene, the whole town learns you sold your pregnant sister. And they'll spit on you in the street. A ripple of murmur ran through the saloon. Men turned, curious. Macklin stiffened, eyes sharp. Rafe's grin twitched. He hated being threatened with shame. Shame was the one thing men like him couldn't buy off. Inez leaned in, voice lowering. Give me until sundown to pack. I'll come quiet, no law, no blood. Just time. Rafe blinked, thrown. Cullen watched from near the door, hat low, body still, heart pounding like a hammer. He could feel the lie in Inez's words, but he also felt the power in it. She wasn't begging. She was bargaining. Rafe's grin returned. Sundown, he said, loud enough for others to hear. Fine, but don't run. Inez's eyes didn't flinch. I won't. Cullen's stomach twisted at the promise she didn't mean. They walked out slow. Outside, behind the sheriff's office, Inez exhaled hard. Back room, she said. Tanner's deputy, Asa, appeared from the corner, pale but determined. Sheriff said I watch, he murmured. Cullen nodded. Then watch. They circled to the alley behind the saloon. The back door hung cracked, voices leaking out, Rafe laughing, Macklin whispering, bottle clinking. Inez looked at Cullen. Wait here. Cullen's jaw tightened. I'm not letting you. Inez's eyes flashed. You'll ruin it. Cullen swallowed, hatred for this world burning in his throat. He nodded once. Inez slipped inside. Seconds stretched like rope. Cullen's mind filled with every possible ending. Rafe grabbing her. Macklin shouting. Hart stepping out with a knife. The child, footsteps fast. Rafe's heavier steps followed. The back door swung wider. Rafe's hand was clamped around Inez's wrist. Where you think you're going? Inez's other hand was behind her back. Cullen stepped into view, rifle lifting just enough. Inez brought her hand forward. Papers. A folded stack, thick. Cullen's chest clenched. Rafe's eyes went wild. You little. Colin's voice snapped. Let her go. Rafe tightened his grip. Inez didn't scream. She drove her heel into Rafe's boot with a vicious stomp. He cursed, grip loosening. Inez slipped free and shoved the papers toward Colin. Colin caught them. Macklin appeared in the doorway, eyes bulging. What's that? Inez's voice was calm, deadly. Your end. Macklin lunged for the papers. Colin fired into the dirt at Macklin's feet. Dust jumped. Macklin stumbled back with a yelp. Rafe roared and reached for his belt. Colin's rifle swung up. Rafe drew anyway. Colin fired and took Rafe's forearm. The shot wasn't mercy. It was precision. It was stopping. Rafe dropped to his knees, screaming, blood bright. The alley erupted with shouts. Tanner rounded the corner with Asa and another deputy, revolvers drawn. Drop IT. Tanner barked. Colin lowered his rifle slowly, hands steady though his heart slammed. Tanner kicked Rafe's gun away and shoved Macklin against the wall. You, he snarled at Macklin. You're done, Macklin sputtered. Sheriff, Tanner slapped irons on him. You sold people. Macklin's face drained. That's... Odelia's voice cut in from the alley mouth. She'd appeared like an omen, eyes blazing. Trafficking, she said. That's what it is. Tanner took the papers from Cullen and flipped through. His face hardened with every page. Names, numbers, routes, a ledger of cruelty dressed as debt. Tanner exhaled, grim. Get a wagon, he told Asa. We're hauling Macklin and Rafe in. Rafe's eyes rolled wild, terror leaking through pain. Crow, he gasped. Crow will kill you. Tanner's eyes went flint. Then Crow can try. Cullen looked at Inez. Her face was pale, but her chin was still up. She'd done it. She'd stolen her own proof back from the man who tried to sell her. Cullen's chest tightened with a fierce, unfamiliar pride. But the victory tasted thin, because Crow's name had been spoken in the alley like a curse. And curses didn't leave just because you wrote them down. They rode out of town fast, Cullen and Inez returning to Redwater Ranch, with Tanner staying behind to secure prisoners. Odelia insisted on coming, riding behind like she was born in a saddle and could outstare death itself. The ranch yard looked the same as yesterday corral, barn, dry grass, quiet. Quiet didn't feel safe anymore. Quiet felt like the pause before a strike. Inside, Odelia made Inez drink tea and eat bread. She checked her pulse, her belly, her eyes. You're holding tension like it's armor, Odelia snapped. Armor gets heavy. Inez's jaw clenched. I don't have another kind. Odelia's gaze softened a fraction. We'll build you one that doesn't crush you. Cullen hovered, restless. He wanted to fix something. He wanted to hammer boards into place until the world made sense again. Odelia finally pointed at a chair. Sit, she ordered Cullen. You're making her nerves jump. Cullen sat because he wasn't sure what else to do. Odelia leaned toward him, eyes sharp. You ever been a father? Cullen's throat tightened. No. Odelia's mouth tightened. Then listen. Being a father isn't owning. It's standing. It's showing up. It's doing the hard thing even when nobody's watching. Cullen swallowed. I'm here, Odelia snorted. Here is a place. You're a man. Decide. Cullen's jaw clenched. I decided. Odelia's eyes narrowed. Then say it to her, not to me. Cullen looked at Inez. Inez's eyes met his, guarded and bright. Cullen's throat burned. I'm not leaving, he said, voice rough. Not you. Not the baby. Not this. Inez didn't soften, but something in her shoulders loosened, just a hairline crack in the armor. Outside, the sun sank. Shadows stretched. Cullen took his rifle and paced the yard like a man waiting for wolves. Late afternoon, Tanner arrived in a hard ride, face grim. Heart's gone, he said. Cullen's stomach dropped. Gone where? Tanner's jaw clenched. out of town, before I could put hands on him, and Strickland Crow's men were seen on the ridge. 3 riders. They know where your ranch is." Inez's hand went to her belly. Cullen felt the world sharpen into angles and distances. "How long?" he asked. Tanner swallowed. "Maybe an hour. Maybe less." Cullen's mind raced through every fence line, every tree, every dip in the land. A ranch was open. Open was death if men came with torches. Tanner looked at Inez. "You need to leave." Inez's chin lifted. "Where?" Tanner's mouth tightened. "My sister's place east." 10 miles. Cullen shook his head. "Trail's the worst place. If they're coming, they'll catch us on open ground." Tanner's eyes narrowed. "Then we hold." Cullen nodded. "We hold." Inez stepped forward. "Tell me what to do." Cullen's instinct screamed no, but he swallowed it. "Inside," he said. "Stay low. If someone breaches the door, Inez cut in. Don't give me helpless work." Cullen's jaw clenched. "Fine. Shotgun. I'll teach you." Tanner's eyes flicked approval. "Good." Cullen moved fast. He hammered boards near the barn, set a loose panel by the corral gate, scattered feed in a way that would lure a horse into bad footing. Tanner took position near the trough with his revolver. Asa arrived with a borrowed rifle, face pale but set. Cullen taught Inez to load the shotgun in 30 seconds, hands hovering, not taking. Her fingers were steady. "I've shot a rattler," she said. Cullen's mouth twitched despite himself. "Then you know fear makes you aim wrong. Breathe." Inez inhaled slow. Her eyes stayed fierce. "Only if I have to," she repeated. "Only if you have to," Cullen echoed, and felt the weight of a trust, shared, dangerous. Hoofbeats came at dusk. 3 riders crested the rise, silhouettes against the dying light. Lyle Hart among them, and 2 men that moved like violence had trained them. Hart called out, voice smooth. "Ain't this cozy, Sheriff? You trying to play hero?" Tanner shouted back, "Trespass and I'll bury you." Hart laughed. "You and what army?" Cullen didn't answer. He waited. One of the men dismounted with a torch. Cullen fired and snapped the torch out of his hand. Flame hit dirt and sputtered. The man cursed, reaching for his pistol. Tanner fired into the dirt by his boot. "Drop it." The man fired anyway, bullet cracking into the porch post, wood splintering. Inside the house, glass rattled. Cullen's heart lurched. "Inez." Her voice came back sharp. "I'm here." Relief hit hard, then rage. Hart's voice floated like smoke. "Burn the barn," he ordered. Cullen's mind snapped. Barn meant hay. Hay meant inferno. Inferno meant smoke, panic, forced movement. Cullen fired again. This time he took the torchman's shoulder. The man screamed and fell, torch rolling away. The second man charged, trying to cut around the corral gate. Cullen's trap worked. The horse hit the loose panel and reared, rider thrown hard into dirt. Asa fired and hit the rider's hat clean off. The rider froze, fear finally showing. Hart dismounted, calm despite the chaos. That calm was what made Cullen's blood cold. Hart circled toward the house, pistol raised. Cullen sprinted inside, rifle up, Hart hammering. Inez was crouched behind the table, shotgun braced. Glass glittered across the floor. Her eyes were wide, but she was steady. Cullen's voice was tight. "Cover the door." "Only the door." Inez's jaw clenched. "What about you?" "I'll handle Hart," Cullen said. He slipped out the back and moved low around the house. He spotted Hart near the broken window, searching for an angle. Hart fired. Cullen dove, bullet ripping the air where his head had been. Cullen rolled up and fired, taking Hart's thigh. Hart grunted but didn't fall. He was stubborn. He was trained. Hart's smile flickered, impressed. "Crow's gonna want you alive," he rasped. Cullen's voice was ice. "Tell him to come." Hart raised his pistol toward the doorway, A shotgun blast thundered. Hart jerked as pellets tore his shoulder. His pistol flew. He collapsed into the dirt, groaning. Colin's head snapped toward the porch. Inez stood in the doorway, pale and shaking, shotgun braced like she'd grown it. Colin's chest tightened. "I said only the door." Her voice shook. "He was going to kill you." Colin swallowed. He couldn't hurt you. Tanner rushed in, revolver up, seeing Hart down. He exhaled hard. "It's over." Colin's jaw clenched. "For now." Hart laughed weakly, blood darkening the dirt. "Crow will still come," he rasped. Tanner's gaze was hard. "Then we'll be ready." They dragged Hart into the barn, tied him to a post, bound his wounds just enough to keep him alive. Odelia arrived again at Tanner's urging, grumbling that men loved bleeding and hated consequences. She checked Inez immediately. "Any pain? Any bleeding?" Inez shook her head, breath shallow. Odelia nodded. "Then you sit. You breathe. You stop trying to win the world in one night." Colin watched Inez's face, his chest tight with a fear he didn't know how to hold. Tanner questioned Hart under the barn lantern. Hart tried to grin through pain until Tanner's voice turned colder than the river in winter. "Crow keeps a freight station by the river," Hart finally admitted. "Warehouse, ledger, girls." The word girls hit Colin like a hammer. "How many?" Tanner asked. Hart's grin died. "Too many." Colin's jaw clenched. He pictured names crossed out in Rafe's papers. He pictured women trapped in darkness because town stayed quiet. Tanner's voice went tight. "I'm riding to the county seat. I'm getting a marshal." Quietly, Hart laughed weakly. "By the time you come back, Crow will be ash and smoke." Tanner's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll catch him in the smoke." Before dawn, a boy rode into Colin's yard, trembling with fear. He handed over a black waxed envelope stamped with a crow. Inside, a single line. "Bring her to the river station at sundown. Come alone, where the town learns what fire looks like." Colin's blood went cold. He brought the letter inside and laid it on the table. Inez read it. Her face went pale. Then she smiled a small, sharp smile like a blade. "He thinks I'm a prize," she said quietly. "He thinks I'm the only thing he needs to threaten." Odelia snapped. "You're not going." Inez's gaze stayed steady. "He'll burn Bristle Ridge." Colin's throat tightened. "Tanner's gone. Help isn't here." Inez leaned forward, voice calm and surgical. "Then we make help." Colin stared at her. She was tired, hunted, pregnant, and she was thinking like a strategist. "We go to town," she said. "We tell them the truth. We bring witnesses. Crow hunts in darkness. We drag him into daylight." Colin's stomach twisted at the thought of Inez standing in front of people who watched her on a stool. But he saw it in her eyes. She was done being used as silence. He nodded slowly. "Your way." They rode to Bristle Ridge and rang the church bell until the town poured into the street, confusion turning to fear. Inez climbed the sheriff's porch and spoke. She spoke of rope and bids, of Macklin's sale, of Rafe's cruelty. She held up the paper's names, routes, crossed out lives. She held up Crow's letter and let the town feel the threat settle into their bones. A woman cried out. A man shouted. Anger rose like a tide. "I am not your sacrifice," Inez said, voice carrying over the crowd. "And neither are the women he's already taken." One by one, people stepped forward. A rancher lifted his rifle. A preacher nodded, face pale. A woman with a baby on her hip said, "We're coming." Colin felt something he'd forgotten existed, neighbors turning into a law. They rode to the river station in a long line of wagons and horses, a town moving as one. Crow was waiting. Silas Crow rode forward alone, black coat clean, smile easy. He spoke like a man offering charity instead of terror. "You brought a parade," Crow said, amused. Inez stepped forward beside Colin, chin lifted. You wanted darkness, she said. You don't get it. Crow's gaze slid to her belly, and his smile turned predatory. Ah, that's the leverage. Inez's eyes went hard. It's not leverage. It's life. Crow laughed softly. Life is what I sell. He signaled, and two men dragged a bruised girl out of the warehouse. The town saw her. A sob rose. Anger sharpened. Crow nodded toward oil barrels stacked nearby. Torches ready. You hand her over, he told Colin, or I burn this station and your town and anyone who thinks they can stand in my way. Colin's hands tightened on his rifle. The deal was a trap. Odelia's warning echoed. Inez raised her voice so the whole town could hear. Look at what you do, she told Crow. You turn bodies into debts. You turn towns into cowards. You make men believe sacrificing a woman is virtue. Crow's smile tightened. He didn't like being named. Behind the crowd, Asa and two ranchers moved toward the torches, circling like wolves. Crow tried to bait Colin. Be a hero. Walk forward alone. Put down your rifle. I'll let these people go. Inez's eyes met Colin's. Don't. Colin didn't move. No, he said, voice like iron. Crow's eyes went cold. He nodded at the torchman. Asa tackled the torchman, knocking flame into dirt. A rancher kicked it away. The crowd roared. Crow's men lifted pistols. Colin fired not at men, but at the warehouse door hinge. The hinge snapped. The door sagged. Men rushed forward and tore it open. Inside were shadows. Women, girls, cages, light hit their faces. The town saw. Silence broke like a dam. Crow's smile vanished. He hadn't planned for eyes. He'd planned for fear. The crowd surged, not to kill, but to free. Women stumbled out, blinking like they didn't believe sunlight was real. Mothers screamed names. Men swore. People cried. Crow tried to regroup, but he was suddenly outnumbered by witnesses with fury in their lungs. Crow's eyes locked on Colin. Pure hate. You just made yourself my problem, he said. Colin's jaw clenched. You were already mine. Crow spurred his horse and fled with the men he could gather, scattering like ash. Shots rang, but the town didn't chase far. They had women to carry. They had injuries to tend. They had truth to hold before it slipped away. By the time the sun set, the station was full of voices, crying, swearing, praying, breathing. Odelia moved among the rescued women like a general, hands steady, eyes fierce, calling for water and cloth and quiet. Inez sat on an overturned crate, hand on her belly, shaking. Colin sat beside her, not shielding, just there. You did that, Colin said, voice rough. Inez's eyes were wet but fierce. We did it, she whispered. No, Colin said, and his throat burned. You did it. You broke their silence. Inez looked at him like she didn't know what to do with praise. I was tired, she said. Tired of being small. Colin swallowed. You weren't small. She let out a shaky breath that almost became a laugh. Tell my brother that. Colin's eyes went hard. I will. In court. The next morning, Tanner returned with county deputies and a U.S. Marshal. They took statements. They loaded Macklin and Rafe into wagons. They hauled Hart in irons. They secured the station. They counted the women and promised protection with words that sounded thin but were backed by badges and rifles. That afternoon, Tanner ordered the freight ledger copied twice one for the marshal, one locked in the courthouse safe, then marched the town's worst secrets straight through Main Street, so everyone had to look. Macklin tried to keep his chin up in the wagon, hands cuffed, vest still buttoned like manners could hide crime. Rafe sat beside him, arm wrapped in bloody cloth, eyes darting at every face. Hart rode in another wagon, silent, staring at the road as if he could will it to split open and swallow him. Crowds gathered anyway. Some people came to gawk. Some came to spit. Some came because guilt is loud when it finally wakes up. At the courthouse steps, the county judge, thin, nervous, already sweating, started to protest about procedure. The marshal cut him off with a federal badge and a voice that didn't care about local comfort. Then Tanner did something Cullen didn't expect. He called Inez forward. The first time she stood on a platform in Bristle Ridge, men had bid on her like she was meat. This time, she stood on the courthouse steps with rescued women behind her, Odelia at her shoulder, and a whole town forced to listen. Inez held up the ledger pages with her bruised wrists still visible. "You can pretend you didn't know," she said, voice carrying. "But you looked away because it was easier than seeing. It ends today." A murmur rolled through the crowd, shame, anger, fear. Macklin leaned forward, desperate. "Sheriff, I can explain." Tanner's hand slammed the wagon rail. "You already did." "With ink." Rafe tried to laugh, but it came out ragged. "You think paper beats a man like Crow?" The marshal's eyes went flat. "Paper is how we hang men like Crow." Cullen watched Inez as she stepped down. Her knees shook when she hit the ground. She didn't crumble. She simply let Cullen's hand steady her for a moment, then pulled away like she'd remember she could stand on her own. But that night, when the rescued women were settled in the church with blankets and soup, Odelia found a small thing tucked in Rafe's coat-black feather sealed in wax, the same crow mark as the letter. Tanner stared at it until his jaw flexed. "He's got eyes in town," he muttered. Cullen's stomach tightened. "Then we don't go back to pretending," he said. Inez's voice was quiet and certain. "We go back to building a life that won't bend for him." Cullen looked at her belly, then at the dark horizon, and felt something subtle fear. Yes, but also purpose. Today, Rafe snarled at Inez as they dragged him past. "You did this," he spit. Inez stepped forward, chin lifted. "No," she said. "You did this." "I just stopped hiding." Rafe's eyes glittered. "You think Strickland will save you?" Inez's gaze slid to Cullen, calm. "He doesn't have to save me. He only has to keep standing beside me." Cullen felt the words hit him like a vow he hadn't dared to ask for. Back at Redwater Ranch, the days that followed weren't peaceful, but they were different. Neighbors came by, some with food, some with lumber, some with apologies that didn't quite fit in their mouths. Cullen learned to accept help without mistaking it for weakness. Inez learned to sleep without flinching at every creak, though it took time. One evening, Cullen found Inez at the gate, looking out across the land. The sun sat low, turning the grass copper. "You thinking about leaving?" he asked, careful. Inez's mouth tightened. "Sometimes." Cullen's chest tightened, but he forced his voice steady. "If you do, I'll make sure you go with supplies and a horse, and no one following." Inez turned her head, studying him. "You mean it?" Cullen nodded. "I mean it." Her eyes softened a fraction. "That's why I might stay." Cullen swallowed, throat burning. "What do you want?" Inez looked back at the ranch, at the house, at the barn, at the quiet that now held people in it. "I want a place where I'm not a secret," she said. "Where my child isn't a stain. Where I don't have to fight to exist." Cullen's voice came out rough. "Then take this place." Inez blinked. "What?" Cullen exhaled. "Half the ranch. In your name, Tanner can witness. That way nobody can ever claim you're just a guest. Nobody can ever drag you out and call it family." Inez stared like he'd spoken a foreign language. "I don't want your pity," she said, sharp. "It's not pity," Cullen answered. "It's respect." Silence stretched. Then Inez reached out and took his hand fully, not fingertips. Warm, real. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "For now." Cullen nodded, throat tight. "For now." Inez's mouth quirked. "And you'll stop trying to be my shield." Cullen let out a breath that almost became a laugh. "I'll try. Try harder," she said. "Yes, ma'am." Colin murmured, and for the first time in years, the words didn't feel like surrender. They felt like home. A week later, Tanner brought papers. Colin signed half the ranch to Inez. Inez signed, hands steady. Tanner witnessed, eyes soft with something like pride. Before Tanner rode away, he looked at Colin and Inez. Crow's still out there, he warned. He'll want revenge. Colin's eyes went hard. Let him. Inez's voice was quiet, fierce. He won't find the same woman. That night, Colin and Inez sat on the porch. The air was still. Crickets sang. The world, for a moment, didn't feel like it was holding its breath. Inez leaned back, one hand on her belly. Colin sat beside her. Not guarding, sharing. After a long silence, Inez spoke. When the baby comes, I'm not naming it after you. Colin blinked, then let out a short laugh. Fair. Inez's mouth quirked. But I might let it have your last name. Colin's breath caught. He turned his head, looking at her. Not because you paid, she said softly. Because you stayed. Colin swallowed hard, eyes burning. He nodded once. Outside the fence line, a crow called one harsh note in the dark. Colin's jaw clenched at the sound, but he didn't flinch. He looked at Inez, and she looked back, steady. Whatever came next, they would face it standing. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.